One of the new features to Vue 2016 is the ability to essentially create a terrain shape based on a spline you create. So I'm going to show you how to do this right now. And it's going to use the layout nodes in the function editor and use either a spline from the scene, or you can create an internal spline within the function editor. So I'm just going to start out by creating procedural terrain. I'm going to get rid of 0 edges and edit the function. I'm also going to go ahead and just delete and just give us a flat surface here. Now what I'm going to do is right click and go to layout, and we can select spline proximity. This then gives us the ability to use an internal spline, which we can edit right here and draw a spline, or we can choose one from the scene if there are any created. So what I'm going to do is just close this out really quick, and we're going to take and select spline. And if you're using Xstream, you can also use splines created in whichever program you're using as the host application. So I'm just going to create a little bit of a spline here, not too much to it. And we'll go ahead and in the middle, I'll just go ahead and raise it up a little bit so we have a little different. Okay, so now what I want to do is go back into the terrain, and we can edit the function. And from the spline, we are going to connect the altitude, and let's do 2D distance first. And that way the height of each of the points doesn't really matter. And I'm going to select that spline we just created, and now we're going to see it show up in the terrain editor. So we can use this as a starting point to create our terrain. We can go ahead and invert it if we want to go the opposite direction. And rather than going through and adjusting vertical gain, if we want to increase the output, what we can do is go to the filter, and we can either multiply the output, but that's going to modify it. If it goes below 0, then we're going to have a value that's going far beyond 0 and then high above 0. So if it's -1 to 1, it might be too much as opposed to 0 to 1. So just to make sure, we'll use the map node, and that way we don't have to worry about it. 2D distance and -1 to 1, and I'll do -1 to, say, well, let's go ahead and do 10, see what that shows up as. Might be a little high. And it does actually look like it wasn't going down that far. We can open up the function node preview. I'm going to set that to 1, and if we just go to the spline proximity, it should show us the extension. And not quite right. So let's go ahead and do 5, and let's go ahead and bring that lower value down a little too. And then we can adjust it that way. So you could either use this as a starting point if you want to paint a terrain. So this will give you just kind of the overall shape to begin with, and then you can go in and start painting on it. Or what we can do is combine it with another node or anything you have generating your terrain. So this is simple fractal. Let's make it more interesting. Perlin noise, terrain, Perlin noise, make it a little larger. Decrease the gain. And then what we'll do is add in a blender. Use the combiner node blender, and input 0 will be the fractal, input 1 will be the spline. And set the output, and that'll just kind of blend them together, or we can add. And that starts to define the shape with the spline. And of course we can go through and multiply and create different effects. And minimum and maximum values. And get some interesting stuff. Or we can just blend them. But I'm going to go ahead and add it, and then depending on how much you want to add it to it, you can keep increasing that number. So now we have like a sharp ridge with a little bit of detail on it. And that's being controlled by the spline shape. Now, besides the 2D, which is only taking into account essentially the top view. What we could do is also set it up so it is using the z-axis or the up and down axis as well. So what we can do for that is it's really just a matter of the output. So we know instead of using the 2D distance, we can just use the regular distance. And it'll be a little bit different because we have that one point in the center that's up a lot higher, so it's a little further away from the rest of the terrain. So that gives you a lot more variation that way. There's one other option, which is the alternate profile. Now it's going to look really weird like this because of the way it's set up. So we'll have to use a different kind of spline for that. So I can show you how that works. First what I'm going to do is just save out this as an example scene if you want to load it in. It's called Spline Design. I'll just go ahead and save it so that you can load it in at this point. But what I'm going to do is just delete that. I'm going to delete this spline here and create one in the front view. And this is going to be for profile. So now that is created, and let's go ahead and add a procedural terrain. I'll scale it to kind of fit in there. And then we'll go ahead and open up that procedural terrain, get rid of 0 edges, and I'm going to right click, go to layout, spline, and choose that spline. And the output is going to be alternate profile. So it's going to give us the profile of the spline. So we can design the terrain from the side that way. And then if we want, we can mix other things with it as well. Using other different splines to define which areas are going to go up and down if you want to create ridges. So you can either use it as a starting point for painting your terrain and sculpting it, or you can mix it with a current procedural. So it's a cool new feature. Gives us a little more control over terrain creation. Not too complicated either, it's pretty straightforward.